Funding for Off 90 is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.
Coming up on Off 90, from Minnesota farm girl to famous mystery writer, meet author Julie Kramer, who rode her way from a farm in Adams to the top of the bestseller list. Journey back in time to historic Forestville, where the past is literally brought to life. Meet a family in Rochester whose love for playing the piano goes back generations. And we'll endeavor to separate fact from fiction in the story of the mythical princess Owatonna. Wow, it's another big show, and it's all just ahead. Off 90. Hi, I'm Barbara Keith. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Off 90. First up, she's a famous author with southern Minnesota farming roots. Julie Kramer is rocking the publishing world with her mystery series starring investigative reporter Riley Spartz. Kramer's books, 3 in all, mix humor, the fast-paced world of TV news, and of course, murder. Also, all of the books are set in Minnesota, giving local readers a strong connection to her stories.
And it's Laura.
Yep.
Okay. Well, people always want to know, are you your main character?
Thank you. Do you want me to personalize it for you?
I think that there's probably a little bit of every author in their main character.
Everybody here tonight, I think, is a cousin of mine.
And a lot of stuff is just pure imagination. And you need that to be a writer as well. My name's Julie Kramer. I live here in White Bear Lake, but I grew up in southern Minnesota along the Minnesota-Iowa state line. I took kind of a secretive view when I started writing a novel. Because I have such a large extended family, I didn't want to constantly be answering questions like, what page are you on? So I really didn't tell a lot of people until it actually had been sold and I knew it was coming out.
A lot of my book stuff has to do with my background in television news, but in this latest book, much of it is set in southern Minnesota, which kind of captures my farm roots.
I grew up on a family farm that's been in our family for more than 130 years. And my siblings and I are actually the first generation off the farm.
On this side is Minnesota, on that side is Iowa. And so we used to, as kids, like to run around Minnesota, Iowa along the road.
We'd husk a lot of sweet corn, pick a lot of green beans. We were a corn and cattle family. Here's a picture of me. This is my champion steer that I took to the fair one year. It's got some of the finest farmland in the world.
It goes until probably that other field you see over there.
My great-grandparents started the farm. My grandfather farmed on it, my parents farmed on it, and my siblings and I, none of us have gone into farming. All right, here's the place. I grew up here, but growing up, it was kind of a hard life. When I decided to sit down and write a novel, I thought it best to set it in Minnesota. I'd be able to create scenes in real locations. And I think people like to read books in which they say, hey, I've been there, or I've eaten there, or I've walked around that park. For my character, she's set in a television newsroom, a very contemporary urban scene, but yet she comes from a very rural area. I think it gives people kind of a sense of context, and it makes the story seem very real.
And so there's lots of outbuildings to hold corn and a lot of feedlot operations.
I did kind of try to capture some of what growing up in rural Minnesota is like, and I thought this could be a great setting for a thriller. I first started off working for the Minneapolis Tribune, and I knew someone at WCCO TV who suggested I come over there and work. and it ended up being a really good fit, and I stayed for about 20 years. I did various things there. I was a field producer. I worked on the assignment desk. I produced newscasts. I produced a public affairs show, and I used to run their investigative unit, their I-team. It's a crazy world, and you get accustomed to it, and so that it almost feels normal. What was kind of interesting was the time that I wrote news, I would often find myself thinking, darn the facts. If I didn't have to deal with these facts, boy, what a story I could tell.
And that is the trailer for Four of a Kind.
But when I sat down to try and write fiction, I found myself wishing I had some facts. Because making stuff up after a, career of sticking to the straight and narrow rules, making stuff up kind of felt like cheating. And I had to work through that in my mind, and then I found that news was actually a very good backdrop for fiction. Journalists know how to deal with deadlines, they type fast, they write lean and mean, and I have interviewed hundreds of people, many of them on the best or worst days of their lives. And I think that's how we develop an ear for dialogue. I left WCCO-TV in early 2001. Running the I-team was a high stress level job. It was hard to do with little kids. So I started putzing around working on a novel. I didn't write it chronologically. The first chapter I wrote for Stalking Susan is actually chapter 3 in the book. Essentially, I created the character first, my protagonist, Riley Sparts. I don't know if there's a way or easy way to answer how you develop a character. I just made her the kind of heroine that I thought people would be interested in. So many books that are written that feature reporters in it. The reporter is the sidekick, the annoying one who, when you need to have someone be killed off during the story, you're like, who do I have? And that person is convenient to use. And I wanted a story in which the reporter could be the hero. And a lot of times it's hard to write that because a lot of times people don't like the media. And for a heroine to succeed in fiction, you have to have people kind of relate to them or sympathize with them and root for them. And in the real world, often people aren't rooting for the media, not these days. Part of what I like to do is take people into how newsrooms make decisions. And I decided when I sat down to write a book that what I needed to do was be candid about the flaws within the profession. And some of my former colleagues think that perhaps I've been a little too candid in talking about how the news works. And they wish I hadn't said things like, if it bleeds, it leads, and things like that for the readers. But I felt like when I sat down to do this, that I had to address the flaws within the profession. And the news profession isn't perfect, and I understand the limitations very well. My first book was Stalking Susan. That was my debut, and that book dealt with a TV reporter discovering a serial killer targeting women named Susan. I wrote that book because I was inspired by some cold cases I had covered as a journalist, and the cases remain unsolved today. My second book, Missing Mark, dealt with a wedding dress want ad, for sale, never worn, and my TV reporter heroine answers the ad and is pulled into a dangerous missing person case. And then in my third book, Silencing Sam, a gossip columnist is murdered, and my TV reporter heroine would like to cover the story but can't because she's become the main suspect.
We sell Julie Kramer's books constantly. She's a very big favorite in the store. She first came in when she was writing Stalking Susan and talked about it. Now, in the book business, you get a lot of people walking in and saying, "I'm writing a book," and you think, "Yeah, sure," you know. But she was so dynamic.
Hi there.
And she was so engaging. Oh, it's so wonderful to watch it because, you know, it's probably their dream come true. But it's also really exciting for the people around them, their neighbors, their friends. Julie's relatives come and they always have the T-shirt on with the book, and they're very supportive.
2, 3. Perfect.
Well, she's a relative newcomer, and she promotes. She's very, very good at what she does. Well, thanks for coming in.
Bye.
Bye. She's enthusiastic and very outgoing. Just a lot of fun to be around.
Here's my dad's grave here. My dad was a storyteller in addition to being a farmer. He would go around southern Minnesota and he would tell stories, some of them about historic things in the past, you know, growing up in the country and rural life.
There was plenty of work. For all the hay and straw had to be handled with a fork.
My regret in being an author was that my dad died without being able to see that, because I know he would have been so proud of me.
And I know he would have just been exhilarated by, you know, feeling, you know, the heft of a book in his hand, knowing that I had written it. So I like to think that I got some of my storytelling flair from him.
Right now I have to take it one book at a time. I've got 3 books under my belt now. I'm working on the 4th, and where I go from there, we'll have to see. It's just been really gratifying. They've been well reviewed, and it's just always kind of a kick to have people tell you that they liked your work. My fantasy is to walk through an airport and see someone actually reading one of my books, and that hasn't happened yet, but I can always hope. Yeah, I don't see myself leaving Minnesota. Minnesota's been very good to me, and I enjoy living close to where I grew up. I just think that that's a real kick, and I find myself fortunate to be able to do that.
A time machine hasn't been invented yet, but we found the next best thing. We're taking you on a trip to historic Forestville, where you can experience what life was like for the pioneers in this region. And that's not all. Reenactors are on site, playing the part of real-life people from Forestville's past. Come along. It's just as much fun as a time machine.
Historic Forestville is the remnants of a village settled early in the 1850s. Forestville was a thriving trade center early on, and as time went by, our village basically died out. Historic Forestville is located within Forestville State Park. The state park was created initially with the land that the state purchased from the Meehan descendants. The Minnesota Historical Society administers the 18 acres that the historic site sits on. We have a first-person living history experience where on your tour of historic Forestville, you will meet several costume interpreters that are portraying the residents of Forestville. You don't, it doesn't turn into a blazer tour where you just come in, this is their parlor, this is this. And I guess I'm a firm believer in living history because I think people better learn by seeing, smelling, touching, doing, than just having, a talking head talk to them. There's no engagement if you just go on your own and wander through. We'd have to have a lot of text on the walls for everybody just to read on their own. I think that living history, I think people enjoy it. I mean, not everyone would like this format, I'm sure, but I think the visitors that come here really, really enjoy the first-person living history aspect of our program.
And they enjoy that pretty much. So what we do is first-person interpretation, so that when you come through here as a visitor, and once you're oriented, you cross the road and you actually go back in time to 1899. And if you talk about things like televisions or computers, we're just going to shrug our shoulders. We don't know what you're talking about. Although sometimes children are surprised what we do know about. They don't think we know what cars are. We know what cars are. There was maybe a dozen in Minnesota. We think there were 5 to 7 in both Winona and Rochester at this time. There were steam-powered tractors, but not here. There were no airplanes, maybe a dozen years. We think that gives a much more complete experience and takes advantage of what we have. And what we have is a lot of information about the people who lived here, a lot of actual artifacts and equipment, and a lot of records that were kept. So we're able to give a fairly accurate depiction of that. And if people are willing to play along, which most are, we really feel that it enhances their experience, and it takes advantage of what we have, and it stretches our limitations of what we don't have.
The tour takes about an hour to go through, and you visit with all of these different costume interpreters. You'll visit the general store, which houses probably 85% of the merchandise that's in the general store today is from the turn of the century. You'll go into the Meehan residence, where you'll visit with other costume interpreters, and you will go into Thomas Meehan's kitchen and all the outbuildings.
Well, this is the general store. This store was built in 1857. It is connected to the Meehan home. When you go in the store, you would see a little bit of everything. You would see veterinary supplies, school supplies for the children. You would see clothing, shoes, hats, in the back, farm supplies, tobacco for the gentlemen, material for the ladies. You would not find many ready-made clothing for the ladies. Most of the ladies in Forestville made their own clothing, but some ready-made clothing for the gentlemen. Well, this is Dr. Scott's magnetic hairbrush. Now each one is sold with a compass, and the point of that is to prove that that magnet inside the brush is very powerful. So if I just pass the brush over the magnet, you see the needle is moving. But it suggests on the back of the box, you might want to get your mind as passive as possible. I suggest perhaps go sit down by the river. And it even suggests if you have a particularly bad headache, you might want to sit in a chair and let someone else brush your hair for you. But you start from the forehead, go back to the spine, and just keep brushing. And within a short amount of time, that powerful magnet will just pull all the tension out of your head, and your headache should be gone.
Well, we'll just head on into the kitchen, and Martha and Janie, we have a gentleman here that would love to have some of your apple pie. I play the part of Mary Meehan, the lady of the house. Mary Meehan is a city girl. She got married a little late in life at age 26, and she married a very prominent man, 12 years her senior. Thomas Meehan is what this whole place is about. So she left the big city of Preston and moved out here to the middle of nowhere into Forestville. As you know, no railroad, no electricity, no modern conveniences that she had in the big city. And well, here she stays for 8 years. Well, we use these apples that we have on hand, and luckily we have one of these newfangled apple peelers here. And my goodness, you can peel an apple in 3 seconds, and that sure takes a lot of time off of baking all these pies.
Well, we're usually in first-person interpretation, so we get to portray, you know, our characters, and I ask them how they're doing, where they're from. Oh, occasionally you get into politics, sometimes at least with the gentlemen, because at the time the women didn't have the right to vote, so it kind of tells people what likely were conversations back then, typical conversations with strangers, whether it's politics or farming. So that always tends to interest people a little more, it seems, but I do show them a lot of the authentic pieces in here. Some of it's reproduction, some of it's authentic. But I tell it like we're using it, like the barrels have linseed oil in them. We sell it for 10 cents a gallon in the store. We utilize there's a shaving horse in there that's nice to display. You get to sit on it and carve out what would be wagon spokes or legs for furniture. So people seeing you actually using the tools instead of just looking at them on a wall, it kind of, I think, brings out a different type of learning that people can utilize. So.
Forestville and its program that we have here at Historic Forestville gives visitors a slice of very accurate 1899 turn of the century history so that they can visit and see firsthand where people really lived, what they really did.
Those people, again, that built this town in the early days pre-statehood, those people that were the very first Minnesotans on May 11th of 1858 and likely celebrated with cannons and a big salute, are now buried, those first Minnesotans up the hill at Zumbro Hill Cemetery. Those people lying in state up there came out here in a wagon. They came out here in a covered wagon. And this is a very rare site that needs to be protected and shared.
They say the family that plays together stays together. Well, the Hagen family of Rochester is living proof of that. The mother and all three daughters play piano, part of a tradition passed down through generations. And this enduring love for playing the piano has brought the Hagen family countless joys.
One of my earliest and fondest memories is of my mother playing the piano for church when I was just a small child. I remember she picked me up at school the last day of first grade and told me that she had a surprise and that I was starting piano the next day, and I loved it ever since. So similarly, my girls saw me playing.
My name is Bethany Hagen, and I'm an 18-year-old pianist. Just seeing relatives play, especially my mom and dad, I just wanted to follow in their footsteps.
Bethany's 12th grade and Christina's 10th grade.
I don't know, I find piano really rewarding. All of the family members, my great-grandparents, grandparents, parents, my older sister, they had all played the piano, and I just wanted to be as good as them.
And Mary goes to RCLS, Rochester Central Lutheran, and she's in the 5th grade.
My name is Mary, and I'm a 10-year-old piano player. I started playing because my sisters did it, and I thought they were so cool, so. To be just like them because they were awesome.
I guess as much time and effort as we've poured into piano, I'm pretty happy to say I'm Julianne Hagen and I'm a piano mom.
Before we take our leave this week, we'd like to tell you a story. If you're from around here, you probably grew up hearing about Princess Owatonna. Legend has it that she was involved in a miracle and that the city of Owatonna was named for her. But did she ever really exist? We'll tell you the tale and see you next week off 90.
There is a legend about Princess Owatonna.
Ever since I was little, we would go out to Mineral Springs Park, and they would talk about, her statues there, and Princess Owatonna, and it was named after her.
The legend of Owatonna came to be. It's strictly a legend, and in history there's a difference between fact and legend.
The town was named after her, but I don't remember why. I can't tell you that part.
In the 1920s, after automotive traffic became very popular, the city of Owatonna decided to promote Mineral Springs. And they envisioned this idea of a poem about Princess Owatonna.
Princess Owatonna, okay, this is the story I know of Princess Owatonna. She was sick.
Owatonna, beautiful daughter with eyes that reflected the brown of an October forest, weary from the effects of the winter struggle, sent for Chuadala and his medicine chest.
And her family brought her here to the healing waters at Mineral Springs, and it saved her life.
Drink deep and often of this water, my daughter, Chief Wabena counseled Owatonna.
Well, this poem was made up about Chief Wabena. His daughter was healed after she drank the water. Some of that certainly may well have happened.
The sparkle will return to your eyes, the flush to your cheeks, strength to your limbs, and the laughter to your lips.
The Indians probably used that spring for medicinal purposes and for whatever, drinking water, and they believed it to be spiritual.
Do we have miracle waters here in Owatonna? I can't answer that question. We grew up just believing in Princess Owatonna.
But as far as a Princess Owatonna, no.
I like to believe that it happened, yes.
Funding for Off 90 is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.